All right, Keith Idec is back. Ring Magazine, longtime friend of the podcast, author of the Idec Index over at ringmagazine.com. Love that. And Keith, before we get into like real stuff, I do want to give some flowers to Joseph Parker, who had, I think, the best call out video that I've ever seen, where he creates a music video to the soundtrack of Shania Twain, You're Still the One, directing directing it at Alexander Usyk. Bravo to Joseph Parker for that call out. And I hope it gets Joe the fight. Serge and I were talking about this earlier the week, but I would love to see this version of Joseph Parker in with Alexander Usyk. I think he's earned it. And I think that that video, Keith, that was money. That was the right way to call out a guy like Alexander Usyk.
Yeah, and it's good that people are using social media in the proper ways and in ways that are amusing and entertaining as opposed to toxic and talking out of their asses, for lack of better words. I mean, people calling for fights that they know are not going to happen and clout chasing and all the things that the young kids say these days, right, Chris? But yeah, but more importantly to Joseph Parker's career, kudos to him for realizing the way that he was going about his business was not the right way. He was drinking and partying while he was trying to train or in between training camps, blowing up in weight, maybe not really taking training all that seriously. He's made those changes in his life and his career, and the dividends are obvious because he really does deserve to fight Alexander Usyk. If Daniel Dubois, I don't really think you could argue that Daniel Dubois deserves that fight over Joseph Parker. They were obviously supposed to fight. He withdrew from the fight. Parker went ahead. People view it a little differently, I guess. I mean, opinions vary as to how hard of a fight it was because Martin Bacoli got on a plane and it kind of came from the runway to the ring almost, and maybe wasn't in the best of shape or was not in the best of shape. But it's a tough fight because the guy can really punch and he's a dangerous guy. So it didn't matter to him who stepped in for Daniel Dubois. He wanted to fight. And then obviously he's got some very good wins leading up to that fight. So he deserves the shot. He's a former world champion. And it looked the most interesting thing to me related to Joseph Parker, Chris, is it looked like it was the end of the road for him when Joe Joyce knocked him out. And it turned out that it was almost the end of the road for Joe Joyce at the top level, which really none of us saw coming. So, again, kudos to Joseph Parker. He's still relatively young, particularly for a heavyweight. So let's see what he's got. I don't think he'll beat Usyk. I think Usyk is a generational talent, as I'm sure you do as well. But he's earned the opportunity.
I agree. And this version of him, a healthier version, one with Andy Lee in his corner, providing the strategy. There's obviously a connection there. I want to see what it looks like for Parker against Usyk. And if I'm Usyk, yeah, I don't know that being undisputed again really matters to Alexander Usyk. I think it would be a feather in his cap too if he could fight and beat Joseph Parker, be another top heavyweight from this era that he'd be able to beat. I hope that fight ultimately.
Before we move on to the next topic,
yeah,
can we just all stop with undisputed? Stop. Please, let's stop acquiescing to the most morally bankrupt, unethical group of people we've ever come in contact with, and stop making it seem as if they're the ones who are telling us who the undisputed champions are. We'll tell you. How about that?
You had some choice words for your friends in New Jersey this week on social media.
Well, enough is enough.
George Kambosos ranking.
George, I know we're going to get into Kambosos later, so we'll save that. But please, someone explain to me. Gilberto Mendoza sent out a letter after what happened with Gervonta Davis and Lamont Roach and said that Steve Willis did nothing wrong. Neither did the New York Commission. How does anyone with any sense who doesn't have their hands out or in his pockets take someone like that with any degree of seriousness? Mm-hmm. It's just, come on. What are we doing here?
Yeah, I'm with you. Having Kambosos ranked that highly by the IBF going into this fight against whoever is a bit of a embarrassment as well. All right, so on the show, we're going to talk a little bit about the business of boxing. We're going to PBC and what it could look like a year from now. Same thing with Top Rank, which has some decisions to make as far as the future of its company. We're going to talk about the Sebastian Fundora fight. You are at the Fundora fight, fighting Cordell Booker. on Saturday, defending his two versions of the 154-pound title, and the aforementioned George Kambosos is back in action in Australia this weekend. But I do want to start, Keith, by talking about some of the reporting that's been out there this week about this new boxing league that Dana White and Turki Al-Sheikh are backing. There's been some reporting about the financial part of all this, and I'm going to read from some of the boxing scene reporting, which is that for the low numbers, for the 10 rounds of unranked fighters, there is a $20,000 purse. It goes all the way up to $750,000 when you defend the company championship with a whole bunch of different levels, different tiers of money in between. Turki Al-Sheikh has come out and said that this is not an accurate portrayal of what the compensation is going to be for these fighters. But it is kind of the first glimpse that we've had of what some of this could look like moving forward. What do you think of kind of the reported pay structure of some of these guys?
Well, I think it's accurate as it relates to that contract. The contracts do vary. They're not cookie cutter contracts. There's a lot of things within the contracts that are similar in terms of the pay structures, but they're not all exactly the same. And I understand the some people being skeptical of this being able to be pulled off, particularly, in the boxing space. There are a lot of people who think that Dana White is going to try to replicate the economic model that has worked for the UFC. It certainly worked for the people who own the UFC, who founded it and have become billionaires from it. People argue that the fighters themselves are not paid adequately. Look, people who know much more about the MMA business than I do seem to agree with that to a certain extent. I don't watch MMA. Chris, I don't have enough time to watch all the boxing that's required of my job. So I'm certainly not going to start watching another combat sport, but I really respect what the fighters do. And you'd obviously have to respect what the UFC has done in terms of making it a multi-billion-dollar business that is more mainstream than boxing is at this point. You'd have to say, I don't know that it's more successful in many ways than boxing is, but it is a mainstream sport. There's no two ways about that. And I do understand, like I said, the people's skepticism about Dana White being the point person for that to do it. He's a very good promoter, but they don't want to see boxing become a monopoly. And I understand that. I don't think that's the intention necessarily. And of course, Turki Al-Sheikh owns the Ring magazine. I work exclusively for the Ring magazine now. I totally understand that. People think I live in some shed in his backyard or something like that. And he comes and tells me what to tell people. That's not actually what happens, but that's neither here nor there. But look, someone, whether it's Turki Al-Sheikh, Dana White, Nick Khan, someone with the financial wherewithal, the vision to do it, has to change the way that this sport is at its foundation, because otherwise it's going to remain a niche sport in the wild, wild west and a free-for-all that is mostly unregulated and unchecked. That's how you have organizations like the IBF. I'm not picking on the IBF. That I live 15 minutes from their office or whatever, but they're the supposed model of the way a sanctioning organization is supposed to operate. Well, that's a low bar. That's what I would say as it relates to that. The WBA is worse. The WBC, despite Mauricio Suleiman's best PR efforts, the WBO is trying with Gustavo to try to be more transparent. I give them credit for that. But this system fundamentally is so flawed and so broken that it should not continue to exist. It cannot continue to exist if the sport is going to be taken seriously from most of the mainstream. I don't know that we ever get back to a place where it's a top 10 sport in the United States that people pay attention to. It's around there somewhere now, depending on who you talk to. But people like us who invested our livelihoods, I now exclusively, and you a lot of it. I know you're an NBA guy also, but we want what's best for this sport. We want what's best for the fighters themselves. I don't care about the promoters necessarily. They're going to make their money however which way they can. And I understand their resistance and their pushback to this because it's going to cut into their profits. Well, I don't care about that. I don't. Do you?
No.
They've made plenty of money. So, and no one is trying to eliminate them entirely and make this a monopoly. So if that starts to happen, there's going to be a lot of pushback, which is why Turki Al-Sheikh said what he said. We're not trying to eliminate everyone. We're trying to work with people. And some people, there are adversaries, and their business approaches and their allegiances are not going to align, and they're going to become business rivals. We see it happening in real time with where I work and where I used to work. It's happening. Let's not, we don't have to sugarcoat anything. Boxing scene is a competitor of the ring. Gary Jonas is, well, he's an adversary of Turki Al-Sheikh. I guess they're going back and forth on Twitter about a lot of things. And look, it is what it is. I mean, it's a dirty, you're going to get in the mud and things are going to get messy. But if people can do their jobs correctly and try their best to do their jobs accurately, I mean, you can't fault people for that. So, but when I see people with agendas and people are going to say, "Oh, you have an agenda because you work," okay, just sooner or later, I would say this to people who are actual members of the media or critics of the media. Sooner or later, your career and your life, to an extent, are going to have to be built on what you've done, not what you've said. So follow what people have done and their track records as opposed to what people say. Because as you know, Chris, people say a lot of things.
Mm. What do you think the biggest obstacle to this league achieving what it's setting out to do is going to be? Because I was in New York, right the week they announced this, and I sat down with Dana and I sat down with Turki, and if I'm being honest, I disagreed with a lot of what Dana said. Kind of the comps he made to building UFC and beating back competition back then. I don't see it because, yes, there was some competition for UFC back when Dana got involved in the early aughts, but nothing like what we see right now. He was able to do things like create the UFC belt, which became the dominant belt throughout the sport, in part because there wasn't all the other variables that were out there. It wasn't the competition that was out there. They however they want to do it, whether it's take over the sport, become the dominant presence in the sport, change the model of the sport, like whatever it is that their objectives are. What do you think the biggest challenge for them is going to be over the next couple of years as they try to get this thing off the ground?
Well, I'd say the greatest challenge, Chris, is the UFC had the benefit of not really they didn't have to break down an entire existing system
right.
that had been functional, however dysfunctional it might be, over the course of decades upon decades. They have to tear down this system, and there's going to be real resistance to that. And to some degree, there are always going to be IBF title fights or WBC title fights, even if they're successful in making this ranking system and having their own champions, whether it's the ring champion or they create some other title. I understand the perspective of people from the outside looking in saying, well, why should the ring have all of this influence and dictate who the champions are? And I understand it. I mean, I'm at my core, Chris. I'm a media person. You've known me for a long time. I come from a newspaper background. I'm trying to look at this objectively, and I do understand the criticism that's going to accompany that if the ring titles are the ones that they try. And I don't know the answer to that in real time right now. So I get it. I mean, there's going to be some criticism. However, if you look at a rating system and you put together a ratings panel of some sort, because what else are you going to do? Because it can't keep operating like this, in the sense that you can't have someone arbitrarily ranking fighters from Germany or wherever based on God knows what, because you can't get in. They don't answer the phone. Two, if I drove from Cedar Grove, where I live, to Springfield, and unless I came with a warrant and to knock down the door, they're not answering the door either. And this is nothing against Daryl Peoples, a nice guy. I like him, but this has to stop. These rankings are ridiculous. And it's not just him. It's not just the IBF. It's the WBA. It's the WBC. I mean, you have guys that are ranked number one, let's just say, in the WBA, and they're not ranked in the IBF, and vice versa. You can't explain that to rational people who want to take this sport more seriously or want to invest their time in following it. And then you tell them that, okay, well, they can't even get the division straight, Chris. I mean, the WBA calls 154 pounds super welterweight. The IBF calls it junior middleweight. They can't even get on the same page with that. It's just stupid, and it needs to stop. And whoever comes along to try to stop it, thank you. I mean, let's have at it. I mean, and if they can all work in conjunction together, if that means working with the promoters and however they figure it out, if everyone can get in lockstep to making this sport more uniform and more organized, great. But people's competing business interests have always gotten in the way of that. And I think that's going to continue as they try to make this league the dominant operation in the sport.
You know, one of the things that I hear from people sometimes is the comparison to Live Golf. When Live Golf came onto the scene and spent a whole bunch of money and got a whole bunch of top name golfers with the objective of becoming the dominant force in the sport. That has not been successful. You know, Live Golf, you know, ratings wise is struggling. It still has some name golfers out there, but the PGA Tour is still in existence. Is that in your mind a fair comparison or a potential, you know, some potentially problematic for this venture moving forward? That, you know, money got Live Golf on the map. It brought some big fighters over, but ultimately it has not succeeded in achieving its objective.
Well, there are only two competing factions in that case, right? Whereas here, the one group that is trying to quote unquote take over the sport and create a monopoly or whatever people are saying, they're already the dominant operator in the sport. Riyadh season, you know, Turki Al-Sheikh is the chairman of the General Entertainment Authority of Saudi Arabia. They've made virtually every meaningful fight in the sport over the last 18 months. They're already doing it. So in the beginning, they were throwing money around at a rate that they couldn't continue to do because they were trying to disrupt the market. That's something that Jake Paul and Nikita Badarian, like, they're disruptors. Well, the real disruptor with the real financial wherewithal to do it are the Saudis, and through Turki Al-Sheikh, that's how it's happening. They're making fights that people want to see. And I also understand the criticism. Like, you want more of the fights to be in the U.S. Well, more of the fights are going to be in the U.S. If you look at the schedule, the Times Square show is right in the heart of New York, right? The Ben Eubank show is in London, but it's not in Riyadh.
Where it should be. Yeah,
right.
exactly.
They're putting the fights where they make the most sense, or more sense. You know, none of these guys are from New York that are fighting in Times Square, but it's an iconic place to have a fight. I mean, they're closing down Times Square. Yet you will have people who have a problem with that because not enough fans can come. There are always going to be people who complain. There are morons out there who are complaining that for $26, you're getting too much good boxing. I don't have that kind of time to invest in enough good boxing. That's an actual complaint. It's not affecting any sort of budget moving forward because there's no budget. Or there is, but it's an expansive budget. Let's just say that. So if you have 7 fights on there and it's taking up the bulk of the afternoon and you have something else to do, well, go do it. And then record the fights and watch it later. Your complaint can't be that you're getting 7, theoretically it was 7 really good fights. It turned out to be 5, but for $26, that's a complaint now? Like, what? Come on. Grow up.
Yeah. You cannot get enough good boxing. I think there is an argument to be made, like, hey, why don't we spread some of these shows out over a period of weeks? Is there a need for 7 consecutive? I'm not going to complain about getting it. Like, I'll happily sit there and watch, 7 straight or 5 good fights on one card. All right. So let's talk for a second. Do you have someone to add to that or no?
Well, I was just going to say, what has it impacted? There's nothing that's not happening because there were 7 fights on that card.
Right.
If it said, okay, well, we're not going to come back until 6 months from now, well, then you would have a complaint. But that's not the case.
No, they're turning it around quickly, doing more shows, big shows, good shows. Yeah, I'm with you there. On the subject of other promoters that are out there, because now everyone is kind of adapting to the new reality of boxing. And you're at this show in Vegas, a PBC show on Amazon Prime, one of the few shows they've done off pay-per-view with Fundora against Booker. And look, PBC was trying to figure its stuff out even before Riyadh season came on to the scene, before this TKO league came onto the scene. They have been, struggling to find a proper output deal since the Showtime stuff fell apart. They do have a deal with Amazon, but that is a fraction of what they once had with Showtime and other broadcast partners. We've had the Tank Davis, versus Lamont Roach fight, Benavidez versus Morrell, of course, the Booker and the Fundora fight this weekend. I'm assuming Tank Roach 2, which I've been told could happen as early as June 21st in Vegas, is another, PBC, probably on Amazon Prime show. But what do you think the future of PBC looks like? How do they stay in business moving forward?
It's tricky, Chris, in the sense that when they had the Showtime muscle behind them for quite some time, and Fox, that they actually had two, as we well know, Fox and Showtime simultaneously. They had a way to keep their fighters as active as possible. And of course, the most common complaint is that PBC fighters are not active, but they did have a vehicle or vehicles, so to speak, to keep them active. So that was very helpful. And then they could push their pay-per-views through the partnerships that they had with those, Fox having commercials during NFL games on Fox, or having commercials on CBS, which was under the same umbrella as Showtime during the Masters or the NCAA tournament, was very helpful to push pay-per-views. They don't really have that now because they're not really getting the type of cooperation from Amazon Prime that they got from Showtime and Fox. So that's been difficult in a way. And also there's not a real firm financial commitment from Amazon to do fights with any regularity. Like this show on Saturday is a solid show. People will say, "Oh, I'm not going to watch." They're going to complain about 7 fights for $26, and they're going to complain for some. If everyone has an Amazon Prime subscription, I think at this point, so it's for all intents and purposes free. They're going to complain that the fights aren't good enough, so you can't please people in many cases. But they're trying to keep fighters active. In this case, Fundora hasn't fought in almost a year because people thought he was going to fight Spence. Spence never actually committed to the fight, as far as I know. So he had to fight someone, and Cordell Booker is number 5 in the rankings. For whatever it's worth, very confident that he's going to win this fight because he has his rationale and he didn't make any excuses. In fact, even when I pressed him to say what was wrong, he wouldn't. He gave Austin Ammo Williams full credit for stopping him in that fight. And now he's here on Saturday night to prove that was an aberration and that wasn't who he is. He gets the opportunity over the course of 12 rounds to prove that to be correct. But Sebastian Fundora is a 14-1 favorite. Odds makers in boxing get it wrong more than in any other sport. That we know that. I don't know that they're necessarily wrong here based on what Sebastian Fundora has done and what Cordell Booker did in the biggest fight of his career. I think that's probably a fair number. But Fundora is he fought differently against Tim Tszyu than he fought before he was knocked out by Brian Mendoza. So which version of Sebastian Fundora are we going to get Saturday night? Are we going to get the more responsible defensive fighter than we saw against Brian? He was beating Brian Mendoza very easily until he got caught with that 3-punch combination that knocked him flat on his back. I don't know that Cordell Booker's that type of puncher. He's not, frankly, but he's a very good boxer. So if he fights in a way where and Fundora's will wear you down, but he's not really a one-punch knockout type of fighter. So could I see Cordell Booker making this a very competitive fight? Absolutely. It's not the highest profile fight, obviously, and it's based on the budget that they have to work with on a show like this. That's the type of opponent he's not going to fight Errol Spence on the show. That's not happening. And then you couldn't satisfy Spence's financial expectation with another pay-per-view sandwiched between, or not sandwiched between, but coming off of a pay-per-view February 1st with David Morrell and David Benavidez, and then obviously March 1st with Gervonta Davis and Lamont Roach. So you can't just keep doing pay-per-view, taking risk doing pay-per-views month after month. You need something in between to sustain your business model, and that's the tricky space that PBC is in right now. They're going to try to figure something out. They're in the process of figuring something out, I believe. But it's going to be interesting to see how they move forward because you do need a real media partner, not I don't know what Amazon's doing. I cover boxing for a living, 24/7 for the most part. I don't hear from the Amazon people. I don't think anyone who covers boxing hears from them.
I mean, we heard a little from like Ray Stallone early on, was doing some stuff. Yeah. Former HBO PR man with he was doing some stuff really with Amazon. But I'm with you. I have not any releases I get about a PBC show come from PBC connected PR people, and very little from Amazon. It doesn't sound like they're overly invested in this product for whatever reason, and don't
Yeah,
plan
I
to
think
be.
that's true. And I don't know what the number for my understanding is that they were very satisfied with what they received the last time there was a show on Amazon Prime, because it was an action-packed show. And of course, there was a huge upset. Bakram Murtazaliev uh, blows out Tim Tszyu. No one saw that coming, So, and that's the last show that they did on Prime. So they really delivered action-packed fights. There was a fight on the undercard that was fantastic, a fight of the year candidate. So the three fights that night delivered entertainment value, particularly for what Amazon has invested in the product. So they were very happy with that, but they haven't done a show in 5 months or so since then. So it's not like they came back and said, "Oh, give us another one in 2 months or whatever." So while they were happy with it, well, what does it matter if they're not really investing more in it?
Mhm. So PBC has this Amazon deal for a little while. As you mentioned, they're working on some stuff to figure out the rest. Top Rank has an ESPN deal for at least the next couple of months. That's going to end of June, I believe, or at some point in that time frame. And then I don't know what happens with Top Rank. They have been out there, they have been active, they've been looking for broadcast partners. That much I know. Uh, they were the subject, and Todd Dubuff was the subject of a pretty nasty lawsuit that was filed by a disgruntled, I don't know what you call Billy Keane, but a employee adjacent, employee wannabe, something like that. Um, it didn't make Todd Dubuff look very good, that's for sure. What do you think the future is with Top Rank? I mean, where do they go from here? Like, I do believe that having some fights with DAZN is an option for them, or could be on the table for them. I don't believe, in fact, I know they're not going to get the kind of output deal that Matchroom and Golden Boy have had with DAZN. So what does Top Rank do? Where do they go from here with their stable, which is still one of the stronger, stables in boxing?
Well, I think if they had their druthers, they would do some sort of deal with the zone. Uh, get some of their content would appear on the zone. They're cautious about putting all of their content on the zone because of its reach at the moment. And I think the zone is probably cautious for a lot of reasons as well. But boxing needs to, just in general, Chris, as it relates to Top Rank, PBC, the promoters that have deals with the zone at this point, boxing in the United States in particular needs to reach a broader audience. So, however, DAZN can go about expanding its viewership is it's imperative, because they have so much quality content. They have so many good fighters under contract through their promotional partnerships. That needs to change. But also, I think it's important to have at least as many as possible, but at least one output deal with a cable, with a cable partner, certainly a network partner if you can do that. But I think those ships have sailed. I don't think we're going to get a network partner. I don't think Fox is going to reinvest in boxing again. CBS is out of it, obviously, with Showtime going out of boxing because they were under the same corporate umbrella that employed me for a long time. So I don't see that happening. That would be ideal, because as much as people want to talk about streaming this, streaming that, blah, 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 people still have televisions,
Mm-hmm.
and CBS, NBC, Fox, and ABC are available in every household in the United States, bar none, and people watch those networks. However, people say, "Oh, well, they just left it on for the news, and that's why the ratings." Whatever. When you can reach the millions, when you can get into seven figures in viewership, it's beneficial to the product. And there's, at the moment, after this Top Rank deal expires with ESPN, um, there's not going to be one. Boxing is not going to have a media partner in the United States that reaches the type of audiences that ESPN does. Uh, there have been flirtations or negotiations with Max, with the parent company of Max, which would be very helpful because it has a wide subscriber base. So that would be helpful, even if it were
Let me just say they're interesting, because from what I'm hearing, like, Turner execs are out there looking for sports rights, right? The NBA is gone after this season. They've got a pot of money, not as big as what they had before, but they've got money. that they can spend. They've got a streaming service they want to keep growing. To me, they've always been the most interesting potential partner for any boxing promotional company looking for a platform. I think the CW is kind of interesting too, because the CW has also been investing more in live sports and has had success doing that. Not enormous success, ratings bonanzas, like the kind of stuff that we're talking about, but they are a viable network that has an audience. It used to be where you'd find like Smallville and shows like that, and Dawson's Creek. Now it's doing a lot more that's out there. So to me, like when I look at the landscape right now, like you're right, CBS is not getting back into it. I mean, ABC, Disney, they've basically made their choice when it comes to Top Rank. Like Max, Turner, the CW, those to me are the two networks that I think have offer the most potential opportunity for a boxing programmer.
So what I took from this is that Chris Mannix watched Smallville. That's number one.
Always a big
Number,
Superman, all
number
kinds
two.
of Superman content.
Number two, Charmed. You watched Charmed too?
That was a huge Shannon Doherty from the 90210 days. Come on.
I'm a big Alyssa Milano fan, so I won't hate on you for that. But Dawson's Creek, I don't know. Anyway, we've gone off the rails here for a second, but you're right, Chris, in that the CW is available in the same amount of homes as the other network giants that we mentioned. They don't tend to be watched as much as those, but it is available in the same amount of households in the United States. And I do think that's undervalued by the younger generation or slicker media executives that just say everything is about streaming. Yes, we are moving toward the streaming age, but a lot of people, and yes, you can stream things on your television and all that kind of stuff, but I always find it fascinating that people are always so ready to this, and it's not just because I'm in my 50s, but people are so ready to dismiss people, even in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Oh, well, those people are going to be dead soon. Well, not soon. I mean, I don't know about soon, but they're also the people with the money. That's what always gets lost in this. The younger generation, and I'm not trying to generalize here, make a broad generalization about everyone, but these are the people who steal your product for the most part. Let's be clear. I'm not advocating for numerous pay-per-views over the course of a year, but these are the people who are savvy enough to steal your product. That's who you're catering to? Or the people with the financial wherewithal to say, okay, well, this might cost 80's too much, but let's bring it down to 30 or 40, whatever. And then they'll buy it. And they're buying it already at 70 and 80 because they have the financial wherewithal to do it. So I think the dismissiveness of people who watch network television still or watch television at all, because the cord cutting thing has been exaggerated to the point where you would think that no one has a cable package. Well, Verizon, Spectrum, all these companies are not thriving because no one has cable. You're talking about tens upon tens of millions of people in the United States have cable. So to your original point about Max, can we get some sort of output deal, even with them? They might not want to commit as much money to boxing, or they certainly don't want to commit as much money to boxing as ESPN was at the rate of $90 million annually in license fees to Top Rank. Let's just say they were willing to commit somewhere between 20 and 30, which is a higher number than you and I have both heard over the course of months. Let's just say we get to 25 or 30. You can put on some good fights over the course of a year that might be available on TBS or TNT, which people watch en masse. That's hugely important. So, and then ESPN, remember, they're going to do a deal more than likely with TKO. So boxing will be available on ESPN. It just won't be through Top Rank. You might not get some of the people have criticized the quality control with ESPN and Top Rank at times. They put on some very good fights, and then they put on some Teofimo Lopez, Steve Claggett types of fights, which you really can't justify. So if you can come somewhere in between on ESPN, because remember, TKO in the beginning is signing mostly prospect and borderline contenders and those types of levels of fighters. So if it's a competitive boxing and you're getting the types of matchups that are going to create entertainment and give the network value for what it's paying in license fees, well, what's wrong with that, right? So then let's just say you have it on ESPN again at the beginning of next year, let's just say, and then Top Rank and or PBC is able to come to some sort of agreement with Max, and then you might have fights on TBS, TNT, a really well put together streaming service in Max. You need that because the zone can't, the zone has been very beneficial for boxing in general, and certainly to the bottom line of my dear friend here, Chris Mannix. But uh, uh, they can't support all of boxing.
Yeah.
That's not sustainable.
Which I think they'd agree with too. Like they would.
Of course, they don't want to.
Yeah.
Why would they? The public shouldn't want it, and the zone shouldn't want it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you there. By the way, boxing could get a big boost from having a Supergirl as the lead in to its shows. Just saying. those CW shows. I mean, they're good lead-ins to boxing. There's a lot of common ground.
I thought you were making a reference to your wife when you're Supergirl. So where's he going with this? What's happening?
All right, so let's talk about the fight you're covering this weekend. We talked a little bit about Fundora against Booker. I happen to agree with the odds makers. I just can't get that Booker fight against Ammo Williams out of my mind. I can't get it out of my mind. And I think Fundora is better than Ammo. I agree with you that he is fighting differently since that knockout loss, but I just think he can be so overwhelming at times. And I think that's what's going to happen with Booker. So I don't want to get too deep into that fight, but the future of Fundora, like he's a fun fighter. He's a freak of nature, being close to 6'6" and making 154. He's been saying all week, Keith, that he's making it easier this time than he did last time around. So he's not planning on going anywhere anytime soon. You've got a couple other title holders that are out there. Terrence Crawford, who we know where he's going, right? In September of this year against Canelo Alvarez. Bakram Mutsalayev, you and I have known Kathy Dubin for a long time. She will happily make a deal with anybody for Bakram Mutsalayev to fight in a big fight or in a unification fight. What do you think the future is for Fundora? Do you think a Spence fight is going to get revisited at some point, a unification fight with Mutsalayev? What do you think is, top of mind for Fundora, for Samson Lukowicz, for PBC officials, the people that are around him every day?
Well, PBC has done a lot of business with Bakram Murtazaliev. I mean, they made him literally
very rich man,
taking step-aside fees while Jermell Charlo was fighting in unification fights with Castano, and then was supposed to fight Tim Tszyu before he got injured, and that fight fell apart. And then, of course, he fought Canelo. So Murtazaliev, Kathy Duva does have a good working relationship with Tom Brown and PBC. So maybe that's something that they can do, because thus far, the Murtazaliev the talks for Murtazaliev to fight on Riyadh season shows have not progressed because they're apart on the money. And of course, they want Murtazaliev to capitalize on his huge win over Tim Tszyu. He's clearly an improved fighter. He's willing to fight Virgil Ortiz, who was not willing to fight him. Or Virgil Ortiz's father said they're not willing to fight him, and Oscar De La Hoya said it as well. So that's off the table. The Boachuk fight, Boachuk, Murtazaliev, whoever can make that fight, whether it's Turki Al-Sheikh or whomever, let's have it. Because that's a banger, man. That's a fight of the year. That's a surefire fight of the year for however long it lasts, and they both want the fight. So hopefully that's something that can happen. But to answer your question as it relates to Fundora, I think the Spence fight is going to be difficult to make because it's too expensive, and it has to be on pay-per-view to satisfy Spence's financial wants. Now, Spence, like many other fighters, is going to have to adjust his financial expectations based on what the marketplace is and what the state of the company that built him into a star is. You're not just going to come and say, I'm going to make X or I'm not fighting. Well, then you won't fight. He got destroyed. And I like Errol Spence. He's learned from his mistakes, and he's admitted to, handling a lot of things personally the wrong way. I like Errol Spence. The bottom line is he got destroyed in his last fight. And you can't come to the table and say, I want this and I want that, without having a fight in between, when no one, and I mean quite literally no one, knows what to make of you, because they don't know what's left of what happened to you against Terrence Crawford. So I would like to see him fight Sebastian Fundora, but inactivity has been problematic for Spence throughout the course of his career, and he has not fought in well over a year and a half now. So Fundora himself is ending almost a 1-year layoff because he thought he was going to fight Spence, and that fight never happened. So if you're Fundora, I don't wait around for Spence. I don't wait around for anyone. Get me back in the ring as soon as you can. But that's not as easy now, based on where PBC is in the business, as it would have been 2 years ago. He's not guaranteed 2 fights per calendar year or 3 fights per calendar year, because Fundora like most fighters, would prefer to be more active than he has been. So, what's realistic for Sebastian Fundora? Can they get him on a Riyadh season show? Because they've sent fighters to fight in Riyadh itself or on Riyadh season cards. Carlos Adames just fought on a Riyadh season card against Hamza Shiraz. So they're willing to do business with each other. So if that's the route Sebastian Fundora goes while they're awaiting an output deal or sort of in limbo as it relates to that, get him in the ring with someone people want to see him fight.
And which isn't that hard at 154 because you can go 15 deep. Yeah. Like 15 deep. You want to make a Charles Conwell fight, I'd watch that. Like there's really good fights at 154. I do think they're gonna have to go outside of Amazon Prime, whatever they're doing moving forward,
right?
And do a deal with someone. I think Riyadh season is probably the preference. I can't imagine like a Murtalayev fight. Like, how expensive is that? And granted, it would have to be a pay-per-view because in the US anyway on Amazon, but that can't be that expensive, is it?
But there's your problem though, Chris, right? You can't. Murtalayev is a fun fighter. Obviously, look what he did against Tim Tszyu. He's improved and coming off the best win of his career. No, people don't know how to pronounce his name. They don't know how to spell it. They don't know where he's from. Come on, you can't put that's not a pay-per-view fight. You can't put people like that on pay-per-view. He fought Spence, Spence shouldn't fight him, but maybe you could, but sooner or later, here's what's going to happen in the PBC universe to circle back to what you were mentioning before. The pay-per-view price just has to come down. That's it. I had this discussion when I worked for Paramount Global, which was in business with PBC. I often asked the question, why can't you lower the price to something more reasonable? And invariably, the answer that I always got was, well, then you're devaluing the product. I disagreed, but that's the business model that they hope was sustainable, and it's not. So if you adjust the price, you can do some more pay-per-views. But if you don't, because look what happened. You have a 7-fight card for $26, as I mentioned multiple times today. Turns out to be 5 fights, but it was $26. And then the following Saturday, you have one of the most electrifying fighters in the sport who struggled that night, and I think deserved to lose based on taking a knee. But he is one of the most electrifying fighters in the sport. He's a knockout artist. He's an undeniable box office draw. He's a star. But you can't come back 7 days later and say, okay, well, this costs $80 when that cost $26, and it was 7 days before, and this card's not as stacked. The undercard was actually good. That Puello Sandor Martin fight actually was entertaining, and no one foresaw that. No one.
Competitive. It was competitive. I'll give it that.
It was. There were moments when it was entertaining. I mean, they were hitting each other, which people didn't think was going to happen. So
that's the bar. That's the Sandor Martin bar right there. You're hitting each other.
Puello Martin too. Let's have it. Look,
Gary Russell was fun.
I haven't been on since then, I think, or maybe we didn't talk about it the last time I was on. Gary Antoine Russell deserves a lot of credit, man, and I'll tell you why. Because coming off of that, the performance in his previous fight where he suffered the first loss of his career to Alberto Puello, and it wasn't his best night. He admits that. He said, "I'm going to prove to everyone that the Russell name is still a force in boxing, and I'm going to go do this for my dad who passed away 3 years ago." And he went and did it because he fought the best fight of his career against a real opponent, who had come back and won, beat Isaac Cruz, clearly won the fight. Not only that, Gary Antoine Russell told me the week before Lamont Roach fought Gervonta Davis that he was going to go in there and do exactly what he did, and was either going to win a split decision or settle for a draw when he probably should have won. Gary Antoine Russell told me that, and I wrote it the day before the fight. Gary Antoine Russell said that, more importantly for his life and his career, fought the fight of his life. So he's a real player in the 140-pound division as well.
Yeah, and hopefully him and Puello can get in. I mean, that's another fight that would be a good rematch fight. Yeah, do that again. And get that moving forward. Just last thing on Fundora, as we branch out there a little bit. You mentioned Spence. Do you believe Spence is going to fight again?
I think from a financial standpoint, he'll want to fight again. And I think he does also just from a pride standpoint. He doesn't want to go out with the last memory of him in a boxing ring being what happened to him against Terrence Crawford. However, he might have justified it in his mind. And he's been through a lot, man. Like, you could argue car accidents and detached retinas and just an absolute beating that he took against Terrence Crawford. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what he'll ultimately determine. I don't know. But um, you could make that argument for sure. I mean, he's made enough. You would think he's made enough money to have invested it in some way where he wouldn't have to fight again. But who knows? Because you never know. Guys are buying cars and things that depreciate in value and everything. So you don't really know. And I don't know enough about Errol Spence's finances to say that. So what I'm saying though is I don't know if he needs to fight. If he does, well, then we'll certainly see him in the ring again. Um, but you got to. I just think you need to be careful about who you match him against, and if you're saying that, you're almost saying that he shouldn't be fighting.
Mm.
Like if you wouldn't put, like if I would have said to you 3 years ago, well, you really shouldn't put Errol Spence in the ring with Bakram Murtazali. If you would have said, what are you smoking crack? Like, what are you talking about? Right. But that's a real thing now. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. The risk reward is big. And I'm not sure it'll go well against Fundora. He's never fought a 54 before. It's basically been a career long 47. I mean, that's a physical fight that he would be in, win or lose. So,
but Chris, on the flip side of that, he's not killing himself to get to 47 either.
true.
So maybe he's a different fighter at 54. I don't know.
He's just taken so much. I mean, in and out of the ring.
Crawford fight, man. I mean, that was
bad. And that to me was about the greatness of Terrence Crawford and somewhat about just the beatings that have been on the body of Errol Spence through boxing, through the accidents, the eye surgery. I mean, all the stuff he's gone through physically have taken a toll on him. Personally, I'd like to see him be retired. No, I know it's not the way you'd want to go out. You want like a homecoming fight against the nobody in Texas to go out with a W, fine. But like the idea of him and Fundora I don't love it. Murtalayev, like that's another tough one. I don't know. That's a tough call for Errol Spence. Last thing for you, George Kambosos. He is back in action on Saturday. His first fight at 140 pounds against Jake Wiley, who is a late replacement. Jake Wiley is the Australian champion at 140 pounds. He is not very good. Based on what I've looked at of him, he was knocked out by an 0-2 fighter a couple of years ago. So not expecting too much in this fight. I got to tell you though, Keith, like I was a big fan of George Kambosos like 3.5 years ago. Like 3.5 years ago when he beat Teofimo, who was such a great story. Nobody believed in him, not his promoters, not his managers. Nobody believed that he was going to go into MSG and beat Teofimo Lopez. And he did it clean. That was a real win. Since that time, though, he has lost 2 fights to Devin Haney. He has been waxed by Vasily Lomachenko. He has that one win against Maxie Hughes, which was disputed in between. And every time George talks, it seems like he just wants to club you over the head with his bank account. And that just bugs me. Yeah, he made a pile of money. Like the people that negotiated these deals, Lou DiBella, Peter Kahn, the people that have been involved with him, who got him paid big money for Devin Haney, really good money for Vasily Lomachenko. Yeah, he's made a bunch of money, but like he's done nothing. Like he is the very definition right now of one-hit wonder. So he's taken this fight against Jake Wiley. They're not selling any tickets to this fight, is what I was told. Like, he's not going to have a big crowd down in Australia. Like, should we care? I guess the question is, should we care anymore about George Kambosos? Like, he is acting like he's a big deal, but he has not done anything since that Teofimo fight to show us that he's still on a high level.
Well, I'll preface everything I'm about to say with saying that I like George Kambosos. He's been easy to deal with. He's a likable guy, done well for his family. He's a tough guy, very tough guy. Leon Spinks didn't come close to capitalizing on his win over Muhammad Ali, for Christ's sake. Nearly as much as George Kambosos has lived off of his win against Teofimo Lopez, which was a split decision win. And whatever was wrong with Teofimo that night, that's on him. That's his problem. Right. So that, you can't really fault George Kambosos for that. He went in there and did what he was supposed to do. However, it was 3.5 years ago. And as you said, he lost maybe 24 straight rounds to Devin Haney. You could certainly argue that he did not beat Maxie Hughes. It's debatable, in my opinion. And then he loses to Lomachenko. So now the argument for George Kambosos would be, well, he lost twice to the fully unified lightweight champion, who's an elite level fighter, and then to one of the best boxers of this generation, stopped him even at 36 years old in Lomachenko. And then Maxie Hughes kind of is what it is, right? But again, you could argue that he has not won a fight. He certainly has not decisively won a fight in 3.5 years almost. And he is somehow ranked number 3 by the IBF at junior welterweight, a weight at which he has not fought in 11 years. And that was only because in the beginning of his career, he was a lightweight who didn't want to get down anywhere close to lightweight. He wasn't really campaigning as a junior welterweight. He just came in at like 140 and a half or something like that for one fight. So he never really was a junior welterweight. I would really like someone from the IBF or anyone anywhere on earth to explain to me how George Kambosos is the number 3 junior welterweight contender in the IBF rankings. He doesn't fight in that weight class. He might not have won a fight for the last 3+ years. He was knocked out in his last fight. Do I need to go on? I mean,
no,
it's idiotic, and it epitomizes why this 4-belt system run by companies that answer to no one needs to be dismantled now. Not next year, not 5 years from now, because this is stupid. You know who he's ranked ahead of?
Yeah, I think you tweeted it, Liam Paro, right?
Right. The actual Australian fighter who wins fights.
Who beat Subriel Matias, who was competitive against Richardson Hitchens. Yeah.
He's 4th. He has 1 loss. He's 4th. This guy's 3rd. Please, someone explain to me how that makes any sense other than the IBF is going to make more money off of Richardson Hitchens fighting George Kambosos in the same venue where George Kambosos beat Teofimo Lopez than they would make off of Richardson Hitchens fighting, well, Subriel Matias, who's the number 1 contender, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
The number 1 contender.
And you gave it away there, Keith. That's why. So they can make a Hitchens versus Kambosos fight, which maybe it'll turn out that I'm wrong, but I don't see George Kambosos winning 1 round off Richardson.
And we've already seen that twice. Devin Haney he did it to him twice. And this is, again, Kambosos is not at fault here. He's just benefiting from this ridiculous system that's in place. And look, very good handlers. Lou DiBella's company is based on, and Lou would tell you this himself. Lou kind of said this on Ariel Helwani's show last week. He said he's got 1 fighter left, basically, that's at the top level, and he keeps getting him paid.
Yeah.
What are we doing? Lou's got enough money. He owns 2 baseball teams.
Yeah. He wanted more for George Kambosos too. Like that was another.
Well, whatever. But I mean, what are we doing here?
I am in full agreement with you there. And it is, by the way, it's a great point that Leon Spinks, who beat Muhammad Ali, did not capitalize in the same way that George Kambosos has, who, by the way, if you spin this forward, let's say he wins this fight against Jake Watt. If he loses, it's over. But if he wins this fight, you fight Richardson Hitchens, you lose 12-0 in what I think would not be a very aesthetically pleasing fight. There's still potentially money out there for a Teofimo Lopez rematch. Like, not as much as there would have been 2 years ago, but there still is a potential payday for George Kambosos. So that win over Teofimo is truly the gift that keeps on giving.
And look, if Teofimo were to fight, let's just say George Kambosos wins on Saturday, which obviously he should, and then he fights a couple of more, marginally talented 140-pounders, and he gets
Daoud Jordan rematch or reschedule that.
There you go. So he wins, let's just say 4 fights at 140. Now, he doesn't want to do that because he just wants to keep getting paid for fights that he doesn't deserve. But let's just say he goes on a little winning streak. Teofimo Lopez beating Arnold Barboza is no foregone conclusion. That's a real fight, as we both know.
Agreed.
But let's just say Teofimo, even if Teofimo loses, that might actually make more sense. If he loses to Arnold Barboza, then he would fight Kambosos, because he's coming off a loss, and then he would avenge his first loss, and then he could try to get back, and fight Barboza again or whatever. But yeah, so if it were Lopez that were fighting him, well, George Kambosos doesn't deserve it, but it makes a little more sense because he beat the guy. he's going to lose virtually every round, probably every round to Richardson Hitchens, who's a very talented guy. And yeah, he's trying to make money too. I get it, but he's a talented guy. He has a world title. He has some leverage. Go put him in a real fight. You don't need to protect him again. And they're not trying to protect him. I don't think. I just trying to keep him busy, I guess. But it's not like he doesn't want to fight. He's 27 years old, and he has a world title, so he should, go capitalize on that as well. But they have to be realistic within the marketplace that exists now, Chris. And I think that's a lot of what's going to happen to just tie this all together. That the market is going to be corrected. Now, people are going to have issues with who's correcting the market, but it needs to happen to some degree.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And that does bring it full circle where we started the show to where we end the show. Keith, I appreciate your time. As always, check Keith out on social media at Idec Boxing. Read his stuff at ringmagazine.com. He'll be in Vegas this weekend for the Fundora against Booker fight. Keith, good stuff, man. Always appreciate your time.
Yeah, same here, Chris. Go Knicks.